Hey friend, welcome to Sleep Theory. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing the community grow. And if you enjoy this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a night with us.
Not everything you fear is real, and not everything real is ever seen. In a world shaped by headlines, gestures, and silence, some of the deepest truths are hidden beneath carefully crafted lies, not with violence, not with chaos, but with precision, a whisper in the right ear, a false report, a perfectly timed crisis. While the world watches the fire, someone else is drawing the map. These are not conspiracy theories. They are mechanisms, invisible hands moving pieces in a game most of us never knew we were playing. You're not here to be entertained. You're here to see what's behind the curtain. So keep your eyes open, and whatever you do, don't look away. False flag operations. The attack that never was. Sometimes, a country wakes up to sirens, a breaking news alert, a sense of panic in the air. A military base has been attacked. People flood the streets, angry, fearful, demanding answers. Who did this? They ask. And the answer, already framed and polished, is presented to them. The enemy. But what if the enemy was never the real culprit? In the shadows of history, there exists a tactic, quiet, deceptive, and cold, known as the false flag operation. It's when a country or a group stages an attack on itself, not to harm, but to blame, to create a narrative, to spark rage, to justify war. The term comes from naval warfare, when ships would fly the flag of another nation to deceive and ambush. Under the wrong colors, a strike becomes a tool of manipulation. In modern times, the idea evolved, more silent, more psychological, more dangerous. Let me take you back to 1933, Berlin. One cold February night, flames engulf the German parliament building, the Reichstag. Chaos, headlines, fear. The Nazi Party blames the communists, claiming it was an attempt to overthrow the state. But whispers in history suggest otherwise. Some believe Hitler orchestrated the fire himself to create an enemy, to silence opposition, and to take total control. That night, the fire didn't just consume a building, it lit the path to dictatorship. Fast forward to 1964, in the dark waters of the Gulf of Tonkin. American ships allegedly come under attack by North Vietnamese forces. Within days, the US Congress passes a resolution granting President Johnson the power to escalate the Vietnam War. Decades later, declassified documents hint that the attack may never have happened or was grossly exaggerated. A war fueled by a phantom strike. And then there's September 11th, 2001. The world watches in horror as planes crash into the Twin Towers. A day of unimaginable tragedy. But in the years that followed, conspiracy theories began to swirl. Some claimed it was a false flag, that certain powers within the US allowed it to happen, or even made it happen, to justify wars in the Middle East and pass sweeping surveillance laws. Whether or not these claims are true, they reveal one thing. When fear takes hold, questions rise, and sometimes those questions echo louder than the official answers. False flag operations are powerful because they strike not just at buildings or people, but at trust. They exploit our need for safety, our desire for justice, and our fear of the unknown. In moments of crisis, when the smoke is still thick and the truth is still buried, stories are written, and not all of them are written by the innocent. So as you close your eyes tonight, drifting somewhere between dream and thought, ask yourself, was the enemy real? Or did someone need one to exist? Silent power, when secret societies seek control. Not all revolutions begin with guns. Some begin in candlelit rooms, behind closed doors, with whispers instead of war cries. While the world sleeps, some believe that others, hidden, in plain sight, are playing a much deeper game. Not with armies, but with ideas and influence. Throughout history, empires have risen and fallen, leaders have come and gone, but the idea of a hidden hand guiding these changes has never quite left the imagination. These are the secret societies, groups that operate outside the public eye, weaving their power slowly, silently, into the fabric of governments, economies, and belief systems. The Freemasons, the Illuminati, Skull and Bones, The Bilderberg Group. Real or imagined, their names echo through books, forums and documentaries. Some say they're just social clubs. Others believe they're the architects of history. Let's go back to 18th century Bavaria. A philosopher named Adam Weishaupt forms a group called the Illuminati. Their mission? To replace superstition and monarchy with reason and equality. But as their influence grows, so does fear. Governments ban them, they vanish, or so it seems. Years later, French and American revolutions erupt, and some begin to ask, were these movements of the people or the result of deeper, hidden hands? Fast forward to the 20th century. Quiet meetings begin taking place among world leaders, CEOs, and media moguls. Events like the annual Bilderberg Conference. No press, no recordings, just the most powerful people in the world, talking. What do they discuss? What do they decide? The public never knows. And yet, global policies seem to shift just after these gatherings. Coincidence or coordination? In the shadows, power moves differently. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't demand attention. It shapes the world from behind the curtain. Some theories may sound absurd, but others feel just plausible enough to raise goosebumps. Could entire governments be influenced by people the public never elected? Could revolutions be sparked, not by the oppressed, but by those who wish to replace one power with another? As you lay back tonight, with the weight of the world melting away, imagine this. What if the true rulers don't stand in front of podiums or wear crowns, but sit quietly in darkened rooms, deciding the fate of millions without ever needing to be seen? Assassinations, when silence is louder than justice. Some deaths shake the world, not because of the person lost, but because of the questions left behind. A sudden shot, a collapse on a balcony, a motorcade that never reached its destination. In the quiet that follows, the same thought lingers in the air. Was this an accident of fate, or the result of a plan? Assassination, the art of ending power with precision, not through battles, not through votes, but with a single act. Swift, quiet, and irreversible. History is shaped not just by the people who rise, but by the people who are removed. Think of Julius Caesar. Once hailed as Rome's hero, he was stabbed by those he trusted most, including Brutus, his closest ally. They claimed they were saving the Republic, but what they truly unleashed was an empire. Centuries later, a warm day in Dallas, 1963. President John F. Kennedy waves from an open car, the crowd cheering. Then, a sound, a second, a third, and silence. Lee Harvey Oswald is named as the lone gunman. But even now, decades later, most Americans believe the full truth was never told. Too many questions, too many missing pieces, too many interests threatened by a man who wanted change. And then, there's Martin Luther King Jr., a voice of peace, shot down in Memphis. Officially, it was James Earl Ray. But behind the curtain, some claim the government knew, or worse, allowed it. Assassination isn't just about removing a person. It's about erasing what they represent. A vision, a movement, a threat. Often, the ones who fall are those who try to change the system. And the system resists. But sometimes, even the attempt is enough. A failed bullet, a jammed gun, a target that got away. These moments still leave marks on history, on policy, on fear. Because even when the trigger is pulled and the target is gone, the questions remain. Who really ordered it? Who benefited? And why does justice so often fall silent? So tonight, as the world outside quiets, ask yourself, are some voices silenced not by chance, but by design? Leaked. When data becomes a weapon, not all secrets are hidden in vaults. Some live inside glowing screens, in lines of code, in places we never see, but that know everything about us. And sometimes, those secrets don't stay where they belong. Hacking, leaking, data theft. In a world built on information, truth no longer hides in books. It hides in servers. And when those servers are breached, the consequences echo far beyond the digital world. It begins quietly, a skilled hand in a dark room, fingers moving across keys, firewalls falling like dominoes. A digital vault is cracked open. Emails, passwords, classified documents, all exposed. Sometimes it's for power, sometimes revenge. sometimes just because they can. Think of WikiLeaks, a platform that released thousands of confidential files, war reports, diplomatic cables, government secrets. Some hailed it as a victory for transparency. Others called it a threat to national security. One thing is certain. After those leaks, the world saw what it was never meant to see, or the 2016 email leaks during the US election. Private conversations of powerful people laid bare, reshaping narratives, influencing votes. Many believed foreign hackers were behind it, but who really opened the door? Data leaks don't just embarrass individuals, they shift elections, collapse corporations, end careers, and sometimes end lives. But perhaps most unsettling is this. Every day we give away our data, our photos, our searches, our messages, all stored in digital fortresses, protected by passwords we barely remember. We trust companies, governments, clouds. But what happens when the clouds rain? What if the things we shared in private are no longer private at all? Some hackers act alone. Others are backed by nations. Cyber warfare is real, silent, invisible, and everywhere. No tanks, no missiles, just quiet invasions into systems we rely on for power, health, safety. The battleground of today isn't land, it's information. So as you drift into sleep tonight, think about this. Your thoughts, your patterns, your life are all data. What if someone already has it? And what if they're just waiting, buying power? When corruption replaces leadership. Not every betrayal happens in the dark. Sometimes it happens under chandeliers, behind polished desks, with a handshake that feels just a little too cold. Power is supposed to serve the people. But what happens when that power is for sale? High-ranking officials, men and women trusted to lead, to protect, to represent, but even they are human, and sometimes the price is right. Corruption doesn't always look like crime. Sometimes it wears a tailored suit. It speaks softly, smiles confidently, and signs documents that shift entire economies in exchange for silence, for loyalty, for favors no one will ever read about in the news. Throughout history, whispers of bought politicians have echoed through the halls of every major government. Bribes hidden as gifts, influence disguised as donations, decisions made not for the people, but for the powerful few who paid for them. In some cases, it's a businessman offering a deal too tempting to refuse. In others, a foreign agent slipping money through back channels, a promise of power, a threat of exposure. And just like that, loyalty changes hands. Think of Watergate. Think of Operation Car Wash in Brazil. Think of leaders across the world, brought down not by war, but by wire transfers. And then there are those who never get caught. The ones who play the game so well, they rise higher with every favor they owe. They smile in front of cameras, while behind the scenes, they belong to someone else. This is the most dangerous kind of control. Not one taken by force, but one bought with quiet deals and quiet debts. Because when leaders are for sale, truth becomes negotiable, justice becomes optional, and the system, piece by piece, begins to rot from within. So tonight, as you drift between thought and sleep, ask yourself, are the people in charge really leading? Or are they just wearing the mask of someone who already sold their soul? Manufactured outbreaks. When fear becomes a tool. Sometimes, the most powerful weapons are invisible. No bombs, no bullets, just a sudden cough, a spreading panic, and a world that begins to close its doors. Outbreaks are moments of chaos. People rush to stores, airports shut down, streets go silent, and in the middle of it all, fear takes the lead. But what if that fear was planned? Throughout history, humanity has faced real diseases, deadly ones. But behind some pandemics, there are whispers. Whispers that say, this didn't happen on its own. Some believe certain health crises are not natural disasters, but strategic tools, created, controlled, released, to distract, to control, or to profit. Imagine this, a pharmaceutical company sitting on a cure, but first, a virus spreads, panic grows, vaccines are rushed, stocks soar, billions flow into private hands, lives are lost. But some pockets grow deeper, or governments seeking more power. A sudden outbreak gives them a reason to lock down cities, to expand surveillance, to rewrite laws, all in the name of protection. Of course, many of these ideas live in the realm of conspiracy, but not all of them are without precedent. In the past, unethical experiments have been done, viruses tested, communities exposed, without their knowledge. The line between truth and fiction begins to blur. And the scariest part? Once fear takes hold, people will accept anything. Restrictions, isolation, control. If it means staying safe, we obey. And if someone wanted to reshape the world quietly, is there any tool more effective than a health crisis? Because fear of the invisible makes us vulnerable to what's hidden. You don't need to see the danger, only believe it's there. Because once fear is inside the room, the door stays shut. So next time the world holds its breath, take a moment and wonder, is the sickness in our bodies or in the system that controls them? Synthetic truth. When media becomes the illusion, there was a time when people said, seeing is believing. But today, what we see might not even be real. In an age of information, media surrounds us. Voices, faces, news, videos. But what happens when that media lies, not with words, but with perfect illusion? Welcome to the world of synthetic content. Deepfakes, fabricated news, digital ghosts of people saying things they never said, doing things they never did. And it's almost impossible to tell the difference. At first, it was entertainment, face swaps, parodies, funny videos online. But the technology evolved. Now, with just a few images and a voice sample, anyone can be made to look guilty, or trustworthy, or dangerous. Imagine a world leader declaring war in a video that looks real, sounds real, but was never filmed. Imagine a witness in court, caught on tape, doing something they never did. Imagine elections swayed, protests sparked, lives destroyed, not by what happened, but by what someone made others believe had happened. This isn't science fiction anymore. It's already here, in politics, in business, in daily life, and behind the scenes. Some believe this manipulation isn't random, but strategic. Fabricated scandals to ruin reputations, fake crimes to justify real actions, digital mobs formed by algorithms that know exactly how to trigger us. When the media is corrupted, reality becomes a stage. And we become the audience of a performance we didn't ask to watch. But here's the hardest part. The truth doesn't need to be erased. It only needs to be drowned in enough noise, enough lies, enough artificial stories to make us say, I don't know what to believe anymore. And in that moment, someone else decides for us. Reality no longer disappears. It multiplies, splitting into countless versions of itself, until the truth is no longer gone, just buried under 1,000 believable lies. So the next time something shocks you, sways your opinion, or pushes you to act without question, pause, just for a moment, and ask yourself, was it true, or simply true enough to control you? Spies. When loyalty has a price, they walk among us, dressed like anyone else. A smile, a handshake, a friendly question, but behind their eyes, a mission. Behind their silence, a second name. Espionage. The ancient art of knowing what you were never meant to know. Some wars are fought with guns, but others are won with whispers. A spy is more than a thief. They are a mirror that reflects what they need you to see. Sometimes they work in embassies, sometimes in cafes, sometimes in the heart of your own government, and sometimes they don't even know they're a spy. Not yet. Throughout history, agents have been planted inside kingdoms, companies, and countries, trained to blend in, to earn trust, to collect secrets, and to vanish if discovered. During the Cold War, the world became a chessboard, East and West sending spies across invisible lines, double agents, mole hunts, silent betrayals. A conversation in a smoky room could shift global politics more than an army ever could. But espionage isn't just a thing of the past. Today, it wears a suit, opens a laptop, and smiles for the camera. Modern spies infiltrate not just places, but minds. They manipulate elections, leak documents, infect networks. They don't need to break in. They're already invited. Some are loyal to governments. Others serve only themselves. And then there's the sleeper agent, planted years ago, living a quiet life, a neighbor, a colleague, waiting until one day the phone rings, a single word, and everything changes. It's not just about stealing information. It's about control, about knowing more than your enemy knows about themselves, about pulling strings from behind the curtain. Trust is a luxury and sometimes a trap, because the greatest danger isn't the stranger in the dark. It's the familiar face with something to hide. So before you sleep and the world turns quiet, ask yourself, in a world where everyone has a side, whose side are they really on? Stolen votes. When democracy is just a show, in every corner of the world, people gather. Some stand in long lines, others press a button, mark a box, or drop their choices into a silent, waiting ballot. They believe they're choosing a future, that their voice matters. But what if the result was decided before the first vote was cast? Elections are meant to be the heart of democracy, a ritual of trust. But trust is fragile and power is hungry. Throughout history, there have been whispers, and sometimes loud screams, of stolen elections, ballots lost, machines rigged, dead names on voter lists, entire districts redrawn to tilt the odds. Sometimes it's subtle. A small change here, a little delay there. Other times it's blatant. Boxes burned, observers removed, results rewritten. And in today's world, interference doesn't need to happen at the ballot box at all. It can happen through screens. Social media flooded with lies, foreign actors amplifying chaos, deepfakes, fake polls, fake narratives. Not to change your vote, but to confuse you so much you don't even want to vote. And behind it all, someone benefits. A politician, a regime, a corporation, or simply the idea that truth no longer matters. Some countries have turned election interference into an art form, others into a secret war. Sometimes the fraud is local, sometimes it crosses oceans. But the result is always the same: people divided, doubt rising, and a question that no democracy can survive for long: did my vote even count? Because when people lose faith in the process, they stop participating. And when that happens, elections still happen. But no one's really choosing anymore. When people stop believing in the process keeps moving, but the soul is already gone. The rituals remain, the speeches, the promises, the polls. But the choice? It's an illusion dressed in ceremony. So tonight, as you rest in the quiet, think back to the last time you believed in something. Not because they told you to, but because it felt true. And ask yourself, if democracy can be stolen without a sound, then maybe the loudest thing isn't the vote we cast, but the silence we're left with after. Distorted truth. When information becomes a weapon. Once, knowledge was power, but now, controlling knowledge is the real power. We live in an age of endless information. Headlines flashing, notifications buzzing, millions of voices talking at once. But in all that noise, something dangerous hides. Disinformation, not just lies, but carefully shaped illusions. False facts repeated until they feel familiar. Real facts buried beneath doubt. This is not a mistake. It's a strategy. Governments, corporations, movements, all capable of launching campaigns, not with soldiers, but with stories. They don't need to silence the truth. They just need to surround it with so many half-truths, so many distractions, so much content, that no one knows what to believe anymore. Think of manipulated statistics, twisted headlines, out-of-context quotes, or fake experts paid to say what people want to hear. Sometimes it's done with flashy graphics and urgent music. Other times, it's a simple tweet that spreads like wildfire, not because it's true, but because it feels true. And once it's out there, no fact check, no apology, no correction can fully erase it, because our minds hold on to the first version of the truth we heard. That's how beliefs are built, not by accuracy, but by repetition. Disinformation campaigns have swayed elections, sparked violence, divided nations, and the most terrifying part, many people never realize they've been manipulated at all. They believe they came to their own conclusions. They believe they're free thinkers. But the strings were pulled long before they ever looked. The most dangerous illusion isn't what we see. It's the feeling that we found it on our own, that we dug for it, that we earned it. But sometimes the answers were placed where we were already looking. So tonight, let your thoughts quiet, but not your questions. Because if the truth has been dressed in lies for long enough, even honesty starts to feel unfamiliar. Digital breach. When silence crashes the system, no alarms, no sirens, no tanks rolling through the streets, just a cursor blinking on a screen. And then everything stops. In today's world, war doesn't always look like war. It can begin with a power outage, a hospital system frozen, a stock market glitch, a government database wiped clean, and behind it all, a quiet, invisible enemy. This is cyber warfare, and its soldiers never show their faces. A cyber attack is more than a technical error. It's a weapon aimed not at bodies, but at infrastructure, not to destroy cities with bombs, but to control them with code. Imagine this: an entire country loses access to electricity, banks go offline, airports shut down, military systems scrambled, not because of a natural disaster, but because someone, somewhere, typed the right commands. In 2010, the world caught a glimpse of this power when a mysterious virus called Stuxnet silently spread through Iranian nuclear facilities. Machines malfunctioned, centrifuges broke, years of progress, undone in silence. Many believe it was a cyber weapon, built by nations, delivered by code. Today, attacks like these happen more often than we realize. Sometimes it's ransomware, locking hospitals out of their own systems. Sometimes it's about stealing secrets, defense strategies, scientific research, classified files. And sometimes it's just to test the waters, to see how far they can go before anyone notices. And the scariest part, no borders, no uniforms. A hacker can take down an entire system from the other side of the planet with nothing but a laptop and time. Cyber attacks don't just break machines, they break trust in systems, in safety, in reality. Not every blackout is caused by a storm. Not every silence is peaceful. In a world wired together by invisible threads, a single breach can unravel everything. So before you power down, ask yourself, what if the only thing keeping the system running is the hope that no one decides to break it tonight? Silence strains. When science becomes a weapon, some weapons don't make a sound. They don't explode. They don't leave craters in the ground. They linger in the air, on skin, in blood, hidden behind locked doors and reinforced walls. Deep inside labs where few are allowed to enter, something stirs, invisible, alive, and built for one purpose: to kill. Biological weapons, organisms engineered not to cure, but to infect, not to save, but to erase. For decades, rumors have echoed through classified documents and quiet testimonies of secret programs, unethical experiments, and labs creating viruses that were never meant to exist in nature. Some were based on real diseases, modified versions of anthrax, Ebola, or plague. Faster, stronger, deadlier. Others were synthetic, built from the ground up like custom-made monsters. During the Cold War, both sides raced not just for nuclear power, but for biological supremacy. Covert labs, often disguised as research facilities, worked day and night, and if something leaked, it would be blamed on nature or denied altogether. Even today, some believe certain outbreaks were never accidents, that a few may have begun in places where science was no longer about understanding life, but learning how to weaponize it. What makes these weapons so terrifying isn't just the death they cause, but the uncertainty they create. A cough in the wrong place, a fever no one can explain. Panic spreads faster than the infection ever could. And unlike missiles or tanks, a biological weapon doesn't need a battlefield. It is the battlefield. It can be carried by a handshake, a breath, a moment. So when silence falls, and the air around you feels still, ask yourself this: if something unseen can collapse entire nations, maybe the real question isn't how it spreads, but who holds the formula and what they're waiting for. Paper wars, when lies light the fuse. Most wars don't begin with bullets. They begin with briefings, with folders stamped classified, with words written not to reveal the truth, but to create a reason. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapon is a report, false intelligence, fabricated evidence, a map, a satellite image, a conversation that never happened, all carefully crafted to say one thing: we have to act. Throughout history, there have been moments when nations were led into war, not by facts, but by fiction. In 2003, the world watched as leaders claimed a threat was growing, weapons of mass destruction hidden in a distant land. The reports were detailed, convincing, urgent, and yet, years later, the weapons were never found, thousands of lives lost, millions displaced, and the documents that lit the fire, still debated, still defended, still denied. False intelligence doesn't just justify war, it manufactures consent, it shapes the narrative. It tells people, you are under threat, and when people are afraid, they rarely ask for proof. Sometimes the reports come from unreliable sources, but are treated as fact. Sometimes they're altered along the way, and sometimes they are built from scratch. A single forged document, a manipulated recording, can send an entire generation to war. And when the truth finally surfaces, it's too late. The cities are already in ruins, the soldiers have already bled, and the ones who pushed the papers, they've already walked away. So if silence ever follows urgency, if the papers look too perfect, pause. Because the next war may not begin with a warning. It may begin with a paragraph. Tapped. When secrets become leverage, they speak in private, behind closed doors, late-night phone calls, quiet conversations, promises whispered into the dark. Because they believe no one is listening, but someone always is. In the world of power, information is currency, and secrets, they're weapons. High-ranking officials, heads of state, CEOs, judges, generals, all with phones, all with voices, all with something to lose. Phone tapping, it sounds like an old spy movie trick. But in reality, it's much more common and much more dangerous. Not just to know what someone thinks, but what they're afraid of, what they've done, who they've called, what they've said when they thought the world wasn't listening. Once recorded, that moment is no longer private. It's a file, a tool, a time bomb. Some call it surveillance, others call it insurance. And when that information ends up in the wrong hands, it becomes leverage, whispers of affairs, off-the-record deals, backroom threats. One well-timed recording can end a career, destroy a reputation, or shift the course of a nation. The most chilling part, sometimes, the threat isn't even made. The mere knowledge that someone has the recording is enough. It's not about justice, it's about control. And when the powerful are controlled by their own secrets, who's really in charge? So the next time you speak freely, when the door is closed and the lights are low, ask yourself, what if the walls aren't just listening, but remembering? And what happens when they decide to speak? Forged reality. When proof is manufactured, truth has weight. A document, a signature, a photograph, one piece of paper, and a life can be saved or destroyed. But what if the paper lies? In the shadows of power, the line between reality and fabrication is thinner than we like to believe. Sometimes a person isn't guilty until someone makes them look guilty. And sometimes the truth isn't hidden. It's replaced. Forged evidence, fake documents, doctored videos, rewritten timelines, all carefully crafted, not to reveal what happened, but to create what didn't. It starts with motive, a threat to silence, a voice to erase, a problem to solve, and then a file appears, a tape, a photo, a printed report, and just like that, the story changes. Sometimes it's used in court, sometimes in politics, sometimes in war. A government justifies an invasion based on classified intelligence that never existed. A whistleblower is discredited by a forged confession. A company buries a scandal by creating fake reports that show everything's fine. The brilliance of false evidence isn't in how perfect it looks, but in how believable it feels. Because once something is documented, stamped, recorded, it becomes hard to question. The burden shifts, the doubt grows, and those who try to defend the truth often sound like the ones hiding it. Even in the digital age, where every file can be traced, technology itself becomes part of the illusion. Metadata altered, emails forged, deepfakes indistinguishable from reality. We used to say, let the facts speak for themselves. But now, we ask, whose facts are we listening to? There are people who vanished because of a single lie that looked official, and people who still walk free because they knew how to forge just one believable truth. So if the next truth you're handed feels too convenient, too clean, too perfect, pause. Because in a world where reality can be written, the next chapter might not be yours to decide. Engineered blackouts, when darkness is designed. At first, it's just a flicker. The lights dim, then vanish. A quiet hum disappears. The world holds its breath. We think of blackouts as accidents, a storm, a downed wire, a glitch in the system. But what if the darkness was intentional? What if someone, somewhere, flipped the switch on purpose? In our modern world, everything is connected. Electricity flows like blood through the veins of our cities, powering homes, hospitals, transportation, communication. Without it, silence spreads, screens go black, systems fail, and beneath that silence, chaos begins to grow. Infrastructure sabotage is not just science fiction, it's strategy. Throughout history, enemies have targeted power grids during war, bombing substations, cutting lines, disrupting life. But today, the weapons are more precise, and sometimes the hands behind them wear no uniform at all. A power station goes offline, a transformer burns out, control centers are hacked, not attacked, and entire regions fall into engineered darkness. Sometimes it's to weaken a population, to sow panic, to send a message. Other times it's to cover something up, a mission, an extraction, a silencing that needs no witnesses. In 2015, parts of Ukraine went dark in the middle of winter, not because of nature, but because of a cyber attack aimed at its electrical grid. It was one of the first warnings. Blackouts are no longer just power failures. They are test runs, and yet these events rarely make headlines. They're explained away with technical terms. But in the quiet, the question lingers. Was this really a malfunction? And deeper still, who benefits when a city sleeps? Because when the lights go out, control shifts, order collapses, and in the dark, it's easier to move unnoticed. So if the hum of electricity feels constant, familiar, safe, remember, the quiet can be designed too, and when it returns, it may not bring light. Fabricated truth. When science is designed to deceive, we trust it because it wears a white coat, because it speaks in numbers, because it uses big words and calm voices, because it feels above suspicion. Science. In a world drowning in opinion, science is supposed to be the anchor, a place where facts are tested, reviewed, repeated, where bias is stripped away and only truth remains. But what happens when the science itself is a lie? Fake research, invented data, studies funded not to discover truth, but to protect interests. It doesn't begin with a villain in a lab. It starts with money, with pressure, with an outcome someone needs to be true. A pharmaceutical company wants their new drug to pass, so they publish 5 studies and only show the one that worked. A corporation wants to avoid regulation, so they pay for a study proving their pollution is within safe limits. Sometimes the numbers are twisted. Sometimes the methodology is flawed. Sometimes the experiment was never even done. But once published in a journal, once shared in headlines, it becomes truth in the public mind. Years later, maybe, it's debunked. Maybe someone brave enough speaks out, but the damage is already done. A generation makes decisions based not on what's real, but what looked scientific. Even worse, some fake studies are designed to discredit real ones. A flood of contradictory data confuses the public, paralyzes action, and leaves people saying, well, I guess we'll never really know. And that's the goal, to blur the line just enough that the truth loses its power. Because when even science can be bought, when evidence can be written to fit the agenda, What remains? If the facts can be fabricated with footnotes, and lies can pass peer review, maybe the question isn't what truth is, but how long it survives before someone replaces it. Manufactured collapse. When wealth becomes a weapon. Most people think financial crises happen by accident. A market fluctuation, a risky loan, a bad policy. But sometimes they happen on purpose. Not with explosions, not with protests, but with spreadsheets, algorithms, and decisions made behind boardroom doors. Money, at its core, is trust. We believe a piece of paper has value. We believe numbers on a screen reflect something real. But what happens when that belief is manipulated? This is financial warfare, not with guns, but with interest rates, currency shifts, asset bubbles, and silent moves on global markets. A powerful bank inflates a housing market, pushing prices beyond logic. People rush in, mortgages grow, debt spreads like wildfire, and when the right moment comes, they pull the plug. Prices crash, jobs vanish, savings disappear, and while the public suffers, those who started the fire already cashed out. In 2008, the world saw the edges of this manipulation. Toxic assets packaged as gold, ratings forged, warnings ignored. And when the collapse came, the same people who caused it were bailed out. Some say this was incompetence. Others believe it was design, because a crisis always creates opportunity for the few. When economies crash, companies are bought for cheap, laws are rewritten, governments become desperate, willing to sell, surrender, or bend. And in the shadows, financial elites grow stronger, not in spite of the chaos, but because of it. Even currencies themselves can be weaponized, devalued intentionally, crashing local economies, creating unrest, and then offering the solution for a price. This is not just about wealth, it's about control. Because when people are scared, when their bank accounts are shrinking, when their futures feel uncertain, they'll follow anyone who promises stability, no matter what they have to give up in return. So if the next crisis feels strangely convenient, if the fall is followed too quickly by a savior, look closer. Because sometimes the collapse isn't the end of the plan, it's the beginning of one. Staged chaos. When protests become puppets, it starts with a voice, a gathering in a square, people holding signs, chanting for change, demanding to be heard. It feels organic, real, necessary. But sometimes, someone else is in the crowd, not to join, but to steer. Protests are powerful. They shake governments. They inspire hope. They can change history. But that power is tempting, and in the wrong hands, it can be twisted. Imagine this: a peaceful demonstration, students, workers, families, standing together. And then suddenly, a window breaks, a fire starts, a masked figure throws the first stone. The crowd panics, police respond, violence spreads, and the narrative changes. From justice to chaos. This tactic isn't new, it's ancient. Throughout history, protests have been infiltrated by those who want them to fail, or those who want them to succeed, but on their own terms. Sometimes, it's agents planted to provoke violence, to justify a crackdown. Other times, it's hired mobs sent to escalate so that the message of the real protest is drowned in smoke and glass. Cameras roll, headlines spin, and what began as a cry for change becomes a justification for control. Order must be restored. Curfews must be set. Rights must be limited, just for now. But now stretches on, and the true cause, forgotten, overshadowed by the flames someone else lit. In the age of surveillance, social media, and psychological warfare, provocation doesn't always come with bricks and masks. It can come through hashtags, bots stirring rage, fake videos shared to spark real anger. A protest is a fire. It can warm, it can illuminate, or it can burn everything down. So when chaos breaks out in the name of justice, don't just ask what they're fighting for. Ask what someone else might be trying to bury beneath the smoke. Divided, when unity becomes a threat. Not all wars are fought with weapons. Some are fought with words. Not all borders are drawn on maps. Some are drawn between neighbors. A nation doesn't fall in a day. It frays, quietly, from within. And sometimes, that unraveling is intentional. Dividing people is one of the oldest strategies of control, because a divided society is easier to steer, easier to distract, easier to break. Create two sides. Give them labels. Feed them different news, different fears, different enemies. Then watch as suspicion grows. A shared history begins to crack. A shared future becomes unimaginable. And the most effective part, each side believes they're right, that they're the ones defending truth, justice, freedom. But all the while, someone else is pulling the strings. Politicians, media, outside forces, all with something to gain from the chaos. They push just enough misinformation, just enough fear, to make unity feel impossible. Us versus them. A phrase that repeats, until we forget there was ever a we. This is how democracies destabilize, not through invasion, but through division. Protests turn into clashes, debates turn into rage, family tables turn into battlefields, and in the smoke of the conflict, real problems go unsolved, because the people are too busy fighting each other to notice who's stealing from them in the dark. When unity is a threat to those in power, division becomes a strategy, and soon, no one remembers how the fire started, only that it's burning. So the next time you feel the urge to choose a side, pause and ask yourself, who handed you the match? False alarms. When fear becomes the message, it starts with a call, a voice, calm or trembling, reporting something terrible. A bomb in the station, a threat in the square, a plan to hurt innocent people. Authorities respond. Sirens echo. Buildings are cleared. Trains stopped. People run, not from violence, but from the idea of it. And then, nothing. No explosion. No attacker. No trace of the terror that was promised. Just silence and fear, still lingering in the air. These are false terror threats, and though no one is hurt by fire or bullet, something is damaged. Trust. Because these calls, these alerts, these sudden waves of panic leave marks. Sometimes it's a hoax, a prank, a cry for attention, but other times it's something else. A test, a rehearsal, a way to see how fast the system reacts, how quickly the people fall into fear. Or worse, a tool to distract, to disrupt, to manipulate the emotions of millions without ever firing a single shot. Governments locked down cities based on threats that never came true. Markets trembled. Airports froze. Schools emptied. All because of a whisper in the right ear. Fear, repeated enough, becomes reality. Not because it happens, but because we feel like it might. And that feeling, that tightness in the chest, that glance over the shoulder, that hesitation to enter a public place, lingers long after the all clear is given. That's the true power of a false alarm. It doesn't need to be real to reshape behavior. So if a lie can empty a city, pause and ask yourself, how many of your instincts were built by truth? And how many were planted by design, weathered by design? When nature becomes a weapon, we look to the sky and trust it. Clouds gather, winds rise, the earth shakes. We call it natural, unpredictable, uncontrollable. But what if that wasn't always true? What if the storm was sent? There are whispers that deep beneath research programs and technological development, some have found ways not to study nature, but to manipulate it. Earthquakes triggered not by fault lines, but by machines. Floods unleashed through controlled dam failures. hurricanes steered, rain stolen, drought manufactured. It sounds like science fiction, but some believe it's already been done. HAARP, a research program in Alaska, meant to study the ionosphere. But to conspiracy theorists, it's something else entirely. A tool to bend the weather, to cause chaos, to trigger disaster, and to hide behind nature's name. Imagine it, a nation suddenly crippled by drought, its food supply vanishing, its people growing restless, its leaders desperate. Or a rival state buried under unexpected floods, just days before a major election. No fingerprints, no trace, just an unfortunate act of nature. Sometimes it's not even about war. Sometimes it's about profit. A disaster drives up prices. Contracts are handed out. Emergency powers are granted. And while the world prays for rain, someone's already counting the gains. Of course, not all disasters are man-made. Most aren't. But the very idea that some could be shakes the foundation of what we think we know about the world. Because when nature is no longer natural, where can you run? So if tomorrow's storm arrives, too suddenly, too perfectly timed, pause before calling it fate. Some storms don't fall from the sky. They rise from a switch, shadow proxies. When enemies wear other names. Not every war is fought face to face. Sometimes it's fought through shadows, through groups that don't wear uniforms, that don't follow rules, that don't officially exist. And yet, behind them, a nation waits, not declared, not acknowledged, but present. This is the world of proxy conflict, where countries don't attack each other directly, but support those who will. Terrorist groups, militias, insurgents, armed not by belief alone, but by silent sponsors. Weapons appear out of nowhere. Training camps emerge in remote places. Funding flows through a chain of anonymous donors, and the group that once had nothing becomes powerful, organized, deadly. But where did the power come from? A rival nation, feeding chaos, not with soldiers, but with strategy. Because supporting a terror group gives a country leverage, a way to weaken its enemy without being seen, to destabilize, to distract, to damage, without ever officially going to war. And if caught, there's always denial. These aren't our people. We had no knowledge. It must be someone else. But the fingerprints are there, in the weapons, in the tactics, in the timing. History is full of these ghost wars, where real lives are lost, real cities are burned, but the ones truly responsible remain untouched. And the worst part, when violence explodes in the streets, people blame the group they can see, not the hand behind it. It's a game of masks, of layers, of violence turned into a tool of politics. So the next time a faceless enemy rises fast and burns bright, remember, fire spreads quickest when someone fans it from behind the curtain, fearcraft. When panic becomes the plan. Some wars don't leave craters, they leave cracks. In trust, in reason, in the mind itself. This is psychological warfare, a battle fought not on the ground, but in perception. It doesn't need soldiers, it needs strategists, people who understand that fear spreads faster than fire, and panic is contagious. Imagine this, a subtle news report, a vague warning, a shortage that feels just believable enough. Suddenly, shelves empty. Banks flood, rumors become facts, not because they're true, but because enough people believe them. And belief is the battlefield. Psychological operations, or psyops, have been used for decades to weaken morale, to cause unrest, to make a society turn on itself. Whispers of invasion, fake internal threats, false warnings of economic collapse, disease, violence, and slowly, the population begins to fracture, not from real danger, but from the idea of it. Because the mind doesn't need proof to panic. It only needs possibility. And when people are afraid, they become easier to influence, easier to divide, easier to lead. Governments have used this, corporations too. Even in times of peace, panic can be useful to push an agenda, to silence dissent, to sell the solution to a fear that they created. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's just a shift in tone, a change in headline, a calculated silence. And soon, people no longer know what to believe, so they believe whoever speaks loudest or whoever speaks first. So if fear ever feels too familiar, too sudden, too specific, ask yourself, was it yours to begin with? Or was it placed there, not by accident, but by design? Constructed conflict, when peace is only a performance. Not all wars begin with weapons. Some begin with words, carefully chosen, publicly delivered, quietly designed. This is the art of the false diplomatic crisis, a conflict not born from accident or aggression, but from intention. Two nations, tense but not at war. And then, a sudden insult, a leaked document, a misinterpreted handshake, a flag displayed upside down, a ship that drifted too far. And suddenly, headlines erupt. An outrage, an act of disrespect, an international provocation. But behind the curtain, it was all planned, because sometimes a country needs a distraction, a reason to rally the public, a justification for sanctions, or military presence, or emergency laws. And so, a crisis is created, with just enough noise to feel real and just enough vagueness to avoid full accountability. Accusations fly, ambassadors are recalled, statements are issued, and the people, they watch in fear or fury, believing they're witnessing a moment of global tension, when in fact, they're watching a scripted play. History holds many examples, minor events magnified, fabricated insults, planted spies, fake attacks, all used to trigger diplomatic standoffs that were never meant to solve anything, only to serve something, a political agenda, a military move, an economic advantage, and when it's done, when the goal is reached, the crisis quietly fades, the flags are raised again, the handshakes return. But the fear, the anger, the division it caused remains. So if peace ever feels a little too rehearsed, a little too delicate, ask yourself, is it really the end of tension? Or just the final scene before the next curtain call? Echoes of the fake. When voices are manufactured, you scroll, you like, you share. A face smiles in the profile picture. A bio says, mother, student, citizen. The opinion feels raw, honest, relatable. But what if none of it is real? What if the person behind that account doesn't exist? In the age of social media, influence doesn't always come from the powerful. Sometimes it comes from the invisible. Fake accounts, bots, digital puppets, carefully crafted to look and sound like one of us. They post, they comment, they argue, they follow, they trend. And while we think we're hearing the voice of the people, we're actually listening to a script. Governments have used them, corporations too. Even individuals seeking power or chaos have unleashed thousands of false profiles, each with a mission to manipulate perception, create outrage, push narratives, distort polls, flood discussions until truth drowns in noise. You see a tweet, then another, then 20 more, all saying the same thing. And you think, this must be what everyone thinks. But sometimes, everyone is no one. These fake accounts stir conflict. They divide, they distract, they amplify fear, hate, confusion, until we don't know which voices are real anymore. And once trust in reality erodes, control becomes easy. Because in chaos, people cling to whoever speaks loudest. And the loudest voice online may just be the most artificial one. So the next time your screen tells you what everyone is thinking, pause and ask yourself, is this the voice of the crowd or the code that controls it? Powerless when energy is silently taken. We don't think about it much. Electricity, gas, oil, it flows, it hums, it powers cities, heats homes, fuels transport, and keeps the world awake. But what happens when someone turns it off? Not by accident, not by nature, but by design. Targeting energy isn't just about sabotage, it's about control, because when the lights go out, so does order. Imagine a refinery, quietly rigged to fail, a pipeline, punctured in the dead of night, a substation, disabled by malware so subtle no one sees it coming. And then, the cascade begins. Factories halt, hospitals switch to backup power, markets panic, homes go cold. The silence grows louder. These attacks often happen in the shadows. So technical, so sudden, they're dismissed as mechanical faults, as routine disruptions. But behind the surface, there are motives. To weaken a rival state, to trigger economic collapse, to force negotiation, or to test vulnerabilities before a bigger strike. Some attacks are physical, deliberate explosions, insider sabotage, chains of command quietly infiltrated. Others are digital, a few lines of code shutting down entire grids, like a heartbeat, skipped by the planet itself. And the most chilling part? You don't need to destroy energy to use it as a weapon. You only need to threaten it. Instability causes fear. Fear drives markets. Fear changes policy. Because when the power goes out, people stop asking why. They start asking when it will come back. And someone, somewhere, is always waiting with the answer. So the next time the lights flicker, just for a second, ask yourself, was it a glitch or a glimpse of who really holds the switch? Seeds of mistrust, when lies start the fire. Sometimes you don't need to fire a single shot to start a war. You just need a whisper, placed carefully between two sides already watching each other with tired eyes. This is the art of deception, not to defeat an enemy, but to turn your enemies against each other. It begins with information, not just any information, believable lies, leaked messages, forged documents, photos taken out of context, stories that feel almost true, but just twisted enough to poison trust. One rival is told that the other is preparing an attack. The other is shown evidence, proof that betrayal is coming. The room grows cold. Diplomats retreat. Alliances tremble. And soon, suspicion becomes paranoia. Paranoia becomes action. And action becomes conflict. But behind the smoke and confusion, someone smiles. Because this was the plan all along. False intelligence has long been used to create chaos. Governments have leaked fake files to pit neighbors against each other. Spies have dropped forged plans in enemy hands. Entire wars have started over what someone believed to be true. And the most chilling part? Once a lie causes real damage, it doesn't matter that it was never real. The trust is broken. The scar is permanent, and no one looks at you, the one who planted the lie, because the fire is too bright, too loud, too convincing. So if the next crisis begins with a headline, a leak, or a whisper, pause and ask yourself, is it truth or tinder? Dose of deception. When health becomes a market game, we take the pill. We trust the shot. We line up for the cure because we believe in medicine, in science, in the promise that what enters our body is there to heal. But what if that promise was just another product? Throughout history, health has been a battlefield, not always between life and death, but between truth and profit. False medicines, unproven vaccines, trials rushed, side effects buried, and behind it all, a silent game of influence. Imagine a new virus emerges, panic spreads, people demand a solution, and one appears, fast, polished, marketed to perfection. But the research was thin, the data adjusted, the risks repackaged. Still, governments buy, hospitals stock, news headlines calm the public, until whispers begin. Complications, cover-ups, contradictions. Then comes the backlash, and whether the medicine worked or not, trust begins to rot. Sometimes the crisis isn't even real. A disease inflated, a threat exaggerated, to sell, to distract, to control. And in the middle of it all, the public, confused, scared, and unsure who to believe. Big pharma, state health agencies, private labs with powerful backers. When profits rise faster than safety, health becomes negotiation, fear becomes currency, and the people, they become data points, market shares, collateral. So if healing becomes a headline, a brand, a stock, pause before you swallow. Not every dose is designed to save you. Some are just meant to sell. Harvest of harm. When fields are targeted in silence, food feels eternal. It grows, it returns, it fills shelves, plates, stomachs. And so we trust it. We trust the soil, the seasons, the hands that plant. But what if the enemy didn't strike the city, but the field? Imagine a crop, healthy, vast, feeding millions. And then, one morning, a strange infection. Leaves blacken, fruits rot before ripening, the yield shrinks. And no one knows why. Officials say it's a disease, a fungus, a bad year. But somewhere, someone knows. It was never an accident. Sabotaging agriculture is one of the quietest forms of attack. No explosions, no soldiers, just ruined roots, withered stalks, starving families, a lab-created blight, a genetically engineered pest, a shipment accidentally contaminated, or a parasite released in the dead of night. The goal? Collapse. Food shortages trigger panic. Prices spike. Riots begin. Governments lose favor. Nations look outward for help and become dependent. And behind the scenes, corporate giants, rival states, or hidden actors wait, offering solutions at a cost. History holds whispers of banana plantations destroyed by mysterious diseases, wheat fields gone barren overnight, animal feed corrupted, causing mass livestock death, all written off as bad luck. But what if they weren't? Because in a globalized world, the easiest way to bring a nation to its knees is not to bomb its cities, but to empty its grain silos. And the scariest part, by the time the soil is sick, it's already too late. So if tomorrow's harvest fails without reason, pause and wonder, was it weather or intent? And whose hands were never seen, but always in the dirt, signed in silence? When freedom is traded away, a deal is signed, smiles exchanged, hands shaken, flags behind them, cameras flash, the crowd claps. But the real story never makes the headlines, because some agreements don't bring prosperity. They bring dependency, secret treaties, quiet negotiations, agreements written in vague language, but with very clear consequences, loans tied to impossible conditions, trade deals that favor only one side, infrastructure projects offered with interest that grows like a shadow. And at first, everything looks fine. A country gets funding, new roads, new ports, new technology. But behind the progress, a quiet chain begins to tighten. Debt increases, control slips, and soon, decisions once made freely now require permission from elsewhere. This is not colonization with soldiers. It's economic captivity, a nation that can't say no because it owes too much to too few. These agreements often come with smiles, but they're crafted in silence, behind closed doors, between leaders, bankers, diplomats, far from the public eye. And by the time the people realize what was signed, it's already law, already binding, already irreversible. Sometimes it's not even about the money. It's about leverage. A vote at the United Nations, a military base granted, a law delayed, all in exchange for relief. But that relief is just another payment. So, if freedom still waves on the flagpole, but decisions are made elsewhere, ask yourself, is independence measured in symbols or in silence? Broken lines. When movement becomes the target. Trains run, planes land, ships dock, roads stretch endlessly, as if they've always been there and always will be. But modern life moves on a delicate rhythm, and when that rhythm breaks, everything begins to stall. This is the quiet power of sabotage, not to destroy a nation completely, but to stop it from moving. Imagine a bridge collapses during rush hour, a train derails with no warning. An air traffic system suddenly malfunctions, grounding thousands of flights, pipelines disrupted, tunnels flooded, ports thrown into chaos. At first glance, it's an accident, a malfunction, wear and tear. But what if it wasn't? What if someone, somewhere, decided to pull the brake, not to kill, but to control? Targeting transportation is more than disruption. It's destabilization. When roads are blocked, trade slows, food delays, medical supplies don't arrive. People lose time, and soon, they lose trust, because a society that can't move can't breathe. And all it takes is one perfectly timed interruption to cause a ripple that becomes a wave. Throughout history, armies have targeted bridges, rail lines, and ports. But today, you don't always need explosives. Sometimes you just need a corrupted sensor, a hacked signal, a delayed alert. And the most dangerous part, sometimes it's not foreign enemies, but forces from within, to create fear, to justify control, to push an agenda that needs people anxious and standing still. So the next time your journey suddenly halts, on the road, in the air, or deep underground, pause and ask yourself, was it a failure of the system, or a signal from someone who wanted you exactly where you are? Staged scandal when reputations are engineered to fall. Some institutions feel untouchable. Courts, intelligence agencies, global corporations, humanitarian organizations, built over decades, backed by history, trust, tradition. But in the right hands, trust is a weapon, and reputation is just another target. You don't always need to destroy a system. You just need people to stop believing in it. This is how it begins. A leak, a scandalous photo, a suspicious transfer of money. A whistleblower comes forward. Anonymous, unverified, but believable enough to ignite the spark. Media jumps. Social platforms explode. Public outrage surges. The headlines don't wait for evidence. Because perception moves faster than truth. And behind it all, a plan. A false operation. Carefully crafted, fabricated emails, edited recordings, fake witnesses, invented accusations. The goal isn't proof, it's doubt. Because once doubt enters the room, even silence feels like guilt. And the higher the institution stands, the harder it falls. A central bank accused of secret deals. A court blamed for injustice it never committed. An intelligence agency exposed for crimes it never planned. And even after the truth is cleared, if it ever is, the stain remains. Because in the court of public opinion, verdicts are emotional, not rational, and the architects of the lie, they vanish. Their goal was never justice, only collapse. This isn't about truth, it's about narrative, controlling what people feel, long before they have time to think. So if tomorrow's scandal feels too perfect, too cinematic, too sudden, ask yourself, is this exposure or execution? And who stands ready to rebuild the ruins they so carefully arranged to fall? Hijacked hope. When charity becomes a cover, hope is powerful. It opens hearts, unlocks generosity, and pushes people to act without hesitation. When disaster strikes, when tragedy unfolds, we don't question, we give. A donation, a share, a prayer. Because someone out there needs help, or so we believe. But what if that cry for help was a lie? In the shadows of crises, fake charity campaigns emerge, slick videos, emotional stories, photos of suffering that pull at the heart. Websites appear overnight, QR codes spread, influencers echo the call. They need you now. And people respond. The money flows, but it doesn't go where they think. No food is delivered, no shelters built, no lives saved. Instead, the funds are rerouted to hidden accounts, to shadow organizations, to secret operations the donors would never knowingly support. Sometimes it's petty fraud, but sometimes it's much more. Intelligence networks, political agendas, or armed groups quietly fueling themselves behind a mask of compassion. Because charity is the perfect disguise. No one suspects kindness. No one questions urgency. No one stops to ask, is this real? Not when the emotions run high. Not when the messaging is so perfectly tuned to our empathy. And when the lie is finally uncovered, if it ever is, the money is long gone. The damage is done. Trust is shaken. And the next time, when a real tragedy hits, people hesitate. Doubt lingers. Compassion slows. Because someone poisoned the well. So if the next call for help feels too perfect, too rehearsed, too cinematic, pause and ask yourself, are you giving to heal or to feed something hiding behind the curtain? The inflation illusion, when rising prices are no accident. Inflation is often explained as a natural part of the economy, a side effect of growth, a response to scarcity, a symptom of global shifts. But what if inflation wasn't always an accident? What if it was designed? Imagine prices rising slowly, then suddenly, everywhere. Groceries double, rents climb, basic necessities feel out of reach. The people look to the headlines, hoping for answers. Supply chain issues, geopolitical tensions, global markets in flux. But behind the curtain, the story might be different. Because inflation, when manipulated intentionally, becomes a silent form of control. It redistributes wealth without a single law being passed. It can erase the value of savings, weaken the middle class, and force entire populations into quiet desperation. And all it takes is a few key moves. Currency printing at the wrong time, interest rates held too low for too long, subsidies removed strategically, or economic data massaged to mislead. Some benefit immensely. Debt becomes easier to pay off for those who own the debt. Assets like real estate and stocks rise. Corporations adjust their margins and grow. Meanwhile, the average person struggles to afford what was once normal. And in their struggle, they become distracted, compliant, dependent. Governments may blame external factors, but sometimes the pressure is internal. Inflation can serve political goals, pushing the population toward a desired policy, softening resistance, or justifying emergency powers. And once the people are cornered, the same hands that tightened the noose offer the solution. New programs, tighter controls, temporary relief at a long-term cost. Because when money loses its value, people don't just lose purchasing power, they lose trust in the system, in the future, in each other. And when trust is gone, control fills the vacuum. So if everything suddenly feels more expensive, but no one can explain why, look closer. Inflation may be a symptom, but sometimes it's also the strategy, the leverage file. When your life becomes a weapon, we live online. We shop, share, text, swipe, store. Every click, every message, every password, saved somewhere, always accessible to someone. And we believe that our data is protected. That privacy still means something. But in the shadows of this digital world, a quieter war is being waged. Not for territory, but for secrets. Personal data theft is no longer about stealing credit card numbers. It's about harvesting your life. Your photos, your search history, your private conversations, your deleted files. Because in a world where data is currency, you are the product. But this isn't just surveillance, it's preparation. Because once they know who you are, what you've done, who you speak to, what you hide, they don't need to break you. They just need to threaten to reveal you. High-level individuals, politicians, CEOs, journalists, even activists, people in positions of influence. They log in, unaware, a quiet breach, a copied drive, and then one day, a message, we know what you did. Or worse, we know who you are when no one's watching. From there, the game begins. Silence this voice, cancel that investigation, approve this contract, resign from that position. One piece of leverage for complete control. And it's not just the powerful who are vulnerable. Ordinary people, too, can be manipulated. Intimate photos, financial records, medical histories, all gathered, stored, weaponized. One wrong move, or no move at all, and the threat becomes reality. And the most disturbing part? You often never know it happened until it's too late. Because digital blackmail doesn't come with ski masks or breaking windows. It comes with a polite email, a private message, a moment of dread. And in a world addicted to exposure and transparency, the fear of being seen is enough to silence almost anyone. So the next time you type, click, or swipe, pause, and ask yourself, are you expressing your freedom or feeding someone else's leverage? The curriculum of control. When education becomes indoctrination, we send children to school believing it's a place for growth, truth, and discovery. A place where knowledge is passed on, where critical thinking is nurtured, where futures are built. But what happens when education isn't just about learning, but about shaping? Not shaping minds with curiosity, but with control. Throughout history, regimes have understood one thing clearly. If you want to control the future, you must influence the young. And the best way to do that isn't through censorship or fear. It's through curriculum, quietly, systematically, generation by generation. Textbooks are rewritten. Historical events are softened, reframed, or erased entirely. Heroes are chosen not for their impact, but for their usefulness. Certain questions are discouraged. Certain answers are rewarded. And over time, students don't even know what they're not being told. It's not always obvious. Propaganda doesn't scream, it whispers. In the phrasing of a sentence, in the omission of a fact, in the tone of a teacher trained not just to educate, but to guide thought in a particular direction. And those who dare to challenge the material, often dismissed, labeled disruptive, told to stay on topic. Governments, political movements, even corporations have used education systems to quietly plant ideas about loyalty, about who to trust, about who the enemy is, and most disturbingly, about who not to question. And the impact? It's slow, invisible, but permanent. Because a belief formed in childhood often becomes the foundation for how a person sees the world. Not because it's true, but because it was all they were ever taught. So the next time you recall a lesson, a fact, a historical truth, pause for a moment and ask yourself, was this something I learned or something I was meant to believe? The distraction machine. When scandal becomes strategy. Not every scandal is a mistake. Some are carefully timed, precisely launched, and designed not to shock, but to distract. Because in a world flooded with information, the real challenge isn't hiding the truth, it's burying it under noise. Imagine a quiet room where something important is about to be revealed, a leak, a decision, a failure too big to ignore. And just as the public begins to look closer, something loud happens. A celebrity breakdown, a political feud, a fabricated controversy. The headlines shift, social media explodes, eyes turn, and the truth, it fades. This tactic is as old as power itself. Create a crisis big enough, emotional enough, or ridiculous enough to dominate the conversation. And suddenly, no one's paying attention to what really matters. A policy is passed, a deal is signed, a scandal is buried under another scandal. People get angry, but not at the right things. They react, they argue, they click. And all the while, the real story slips by unnoticed. Sometimes these distractions are real events, simply exaggerated and weaponized. Other times, they're entirely orchestrated. A convenient scandal, a manufactured feud, an outrage designed in a boardroom, scripted for maximum impact. And it works. Every time. Because attention is the most valuable currency in the modern world. And those who control it, control the narrative. While people argue about what they think matters, the people in power move freely behind the curtain. Unseen, unchecked, uninterrupted. So next time the headlines scream, the feeds flood, the noise rises, pause, and ask yourself, what was being done in the silence you forgot to listen to? The fabricated past. When history becomes a weapon, history is supposed to be a record, a memory carved in stone, documented in ink, preserved for generations. But in the right hands, even the past can be rewritten, not with time machines, but with forged documents. A treaty suddenly discovered in an old archive, a map that shows a border differently, a letter between dead leaders that suggests betrayal, a speech, a law, a secret pact, all crafted with care, aged with precision, and then leaked at just the right moment. And when it appears, the world shifts. Nations demand land they never owned. Apologies are demanded. Compensation is requested. Tensions rise. Flags are waved. Newsrooms ignite. And a crisis is born, not because of something that happened, but because of something that seems to have happened. These fabrications are more than lies. They are triggers. Triggers designed to provoke outrage, spark protests, justify sanctions, or even start war. Because when you control the past, you can control the emotions of the present. You can reignite old wounds, reshape alliances, and push entire populations into action, all without firing a single bullet. And the truth? It always arrives too late. By the time the document is questioned, analyzed, exposed as false, the damage is done. Trust is broken. Lines have been crossed. Troops may already be mobilizing. And those who started the fire? Nowhere to be found. This is the power of falsified history. It doesn't just change the narrative. It creates one. So next time a headline claims to reveal a hidden past, pause. Ask yourself, whose hands held the pen? And what future were they writing long before we even noticed? The quiet grip, when threats replace choice. Some power doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't demand, it suggests. It doesn't need violence, just the right sentence, at the right time, said by the right person. This is the world of blackmail, of quiet threats, of obedience wrapped in polite smiles. Because when someone has something on you, something personal, something damaging, they don't need to control your body. They control your fear. It starts with a secret, a private moment, a financial mistake, a hidden affair, a conversation you thought no one heard, something you prayed would never come to light. And then, one day, someone knocks, or sends an email, or makes a subtle comment that says everything without saying anything at all. From that moment on, your choices are no longer your own. Blackmail doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's invisible. A lawmaker who suddenly changes their vote, a CEO who steps down for personal reasons, a journalist who stops digging, and we on the outside never know why. We just see the shift and move on. But in the shadows, someone has won. Without force, without noise, just leverage. The more powerful the target, the more valuable the silence. Politicians, military officials, judges, tech executives, people in positions that shape the world, all vulnerable to secrets. Because the higher you climb, the harder you fall. And someone is always watching, waiting for the right moment to push. And if blackmail doesn't work, there's always the next step. Threat, career, family, reputation, freedom, life. Everything becomes negotiable when fear is the currency. So next time someone in power makes a choice that feels out of character, ask yourself, was it their decision or the result of a whisper no one else heard? The hidden flow. When secret networks fuel the underground, the economy we see is only half the story. Above the surface, taxes, regulations, official reports, smiling CEOs. But beneath it all, a darker current flows, a parallel world of trade, untouched by law, untouched by oversight, and often fueled by those who want it that way. This is the underground economy, black markets, unregistered wealth, silent deals made in dimly lit rooms. But it doesn't run on chaos alone. It runs on structure, hidden structure, invisible networks with very real power. And behind many of these systems are secret organizations, not just criminal gangs, but carefully organized entities, groups that exist without names, that build connections across borders, across governments, across generations. They don't just profit from the underground economy. They create it. They smuggle, launder, traffic, fund, arms, drugs, rare minerals, stolen data, even people. But they also deal in influence. A bribe here, a silence there, a favor that comes with a future cost. And slowly they build a financial empire that operates completely out of sight, yet shapes everything above. Sometimes they're embedded within legitimate businesses. Sometimes they use charities, shell companies, or foreign accounts as cover. And sometimes they work with those in power. Because corruption isn't just about money, it's about access. And in a world where money flows without borders, the ones who control it from the shadows hold more power than any president. Governments may chase them. Investigations may begin. But they almost always end in confusion, delay, or mysterious silence. Because you can't dismantle a structure you can't see. And by the time you realize the scale of it, the system is already dependent on it. Parts of entire economies quietly rely on these hidden flows to function. It's not just the criminals who benefit. It's the bankers, the politicians, the ones who claim to fight the darkness while drinking from its well. So the next time someone promises to clean the system, to fight corruption, to bring transparency, ask yourself, how do you clean a house when the rot is in the foundation, driven by fear? When exodus is engineered, people don't abandon their homes easily. It takes more than uncertainty, more than discomfort. It takes fear, not the kind that comes and goes, but the kind that settles into the bones. And sometimes that fear doesn't come naturally. It's designed. Throughout history, mass migrations have happened in the wake of war, disaster, poverty. But sometimes, behind the visible reasons, there's a quieter force at work, one that wants people to leave. Not because they're unwanted, but because their absence serves a purpose. Governments, militias, foreign actors all have, at times, created fear to shift populations, a campaign of intimidation, a string of violent events, a constant, low-grade terror that never quite makes the headlines but always lingers in the streets. People begin to whisper, doors stay closed, and then the movement begins. Slow at first, then unstoppable. Entire neighborhoods empty, cities lose their voices. And the land left behind, ready to be bought, occupied, repurposed. Sometimes the motive is demographic control, changing the makeup of a region to secure political advantage. Sometimes it's economic, clearing out resistance so development projects or foreign investors can move in without local opposition. And sometimes it's psychological warfare, because when a people are uprooted, their sense of self erodes, identity scatters, and rebuilding becomes almost impossible. The techniques vary: strategic instability, encouraged rumors, selective attacks, media manipulation, and always just enough deniability to make it seem like people left on their own. But they didn't. They were pushed, and in their place, silence. So if you ever find yourself wondering why a community vanished, why a region emptied, why homes were left locked and gardens left to grow wild, ask not where they went, but who made staying feel impossible. Manufactured messiahs. When heroes are built to control. In uncertain times, people look for direction. In chaos, they search for voices that promise clarity, confidence, salvation. And when the fear is deep enough, when trust in institutions fades, it doesn't take much for a new leader to rise, strong, charismatic, visionary. But sometimes they weren't found, they were created. Throughout history, societies have followed figures who seemed larger than life. Revolutionaries, reformers, saviors. Their faces appear on screens, their speeches go viral, their stories sound like destiny. But behind the spotlight, behind the headlines, behind the emotional pull, there is often something else. A strategy. Manufactured heroes don't need to be real. They just need to be believable, crafted by think tanks, PR firms, political machines, or shadowy coalitions with something to gain. Their past is curated, their image controlled, their narrative carefully sculpted to match the needs of the moment. They are designed to unite or divide, depending on what the architects behind them desire. These false leaders rally the people, but never challenge the true structures of power. They redirect anger away from the source. They create the illusion of choice, the appearance of change. And the public, desperate for something to believe in, follows, not knowing that the stage was built long before the show began. Sometimes it's a political figure. Sometimes a celebrity turned activist. Sometimes a voice that seems to emerge from the crowd, only to serve a much older agenda. And when their role is done, they fade, discredited, distracted, or replaced by the next savior waiting in the wings. The most dangerous thing about these figures isn't that they lie, but that they fill a need for meaning, for hope, for direction. And once people invest emotionally, truth becomes irrelevant. So the next time someone feels too perfect, too timely, too ready to lead, ask yourself, is this leadership or casting? False prophets. When faith becomes a tool, there are few forces more powerful than belief. Belief in something greater, in meaning, in destiny, in the unseen. And in times of fear or uncertainty, people turn inward, searching for purpose, for guidance, for peace. But what if the source they turn to was built to control them? Throughout history, rulers and institutions have used religion and mysticism to influence hearts and minds, not always through suppression, but through creation. Entire movements, invented from fragments of truth, wrapped in charisma, and delivered by someone who claims to speak on behalf of the divine. These false spiritual movements don't start with faith, they start with design. A narrative is built, symbols are chosen, rituals are created. A figure emerges, part mystic, part leader, part savior. They offer answers to deep questions, comfort in uncertain times, and a path that feels transcendent, but leads to obedience. It may begin with harmless messages, love, unity, peace. But over time, the teachings shift. Loyalty becomes a virtue, doubt becomes betrayal, independent thought becomes dangerous, and the followers, drawn in by truth, are held in place by fear. Some of these movements are small, others grow global. Some are backed by cult-like devotion, others subtly influence politics, law, and culture. And behind the curtain, their true purpose is revealed. Not spiritual enlightenment, but social engineering. They can be used to pacify rebellion, to isolate communities, to justify injustice, or to redirect energy away from real change. And because they operate under the banner of belief, they are protected. Criticism becomes taboo. Questions are seen as attacks. And slowly, a lie becomes sacred. And the people? They don't know they're being controlled. They think they've been chosen, So if a voice ever claims to hold all the answers, to speak on behalf of something higher, and asks for your loyalty in return, stop and wonder, is it your soul they're guiding, or your freedom they're keeping? Presumed guilty. When justice serves a hidden agenda, justice is supposed to be blind, objective, unwavering. A system that protects the innocent and holds the guilty accountable. But in certain hands, the justice system becomes something else, entirely. Not a shield, but a weapon. And the most chilling part? It doesn't need a real crime to act. Throughout history, power structures have used false accusations to silence, remove, or discredit individuals who posed a threat, not because they broke the law, but because they disrupted the plan. One forged document, one manipulated witness, one anonymous tip. That's all it takes. Suddenly, a person wakes up not as a citizen, but as a suspect. Cameras roll, headlines scream. Their name becomes synonymous with shame, with scandal, with guilt, before a trial even begins. Sometimes it's journalists, sometimes activists, sometimes former allies who saw too much. The charges vary: fraud, treason, misconduct, corruption. But the purpose is always the same: silence the voice, isolate the influence, erase the threat. And once arrested, the accused enters a system that no longer seeks truth, but confirmation. Evidence is twisted, context is removed, delay becomes punishment, and even if innocence is eventually proven, the damage is already done. Reputations are ruined, careers collapse, the public has moved on. These aren't accidents. They're operations, legal on the surface, rotten underneath. They serve as warnings to others. This could happen to you. They maintain illusions of control, and they allow those in power to say, "See, we follow the law," even as they bend it beyond recognition. So if the justice system ever points its finger at someone too quickly, too loudly, too confidently, pause. And remember, sometimes the crime isn't what was done, but who dared to speak. Within the walls. When betrayal is the strategy, some attacks don't come from across the border. They come from across the table. Smiling faces, familiar voices, people trusted, welcomed, embraced. All the while, carrying something far more dangerous than a weapon: intent. Infiltration is one of the oldest strategies in the history of control. Why fight an enemy from the outside when you can become one of them? Blend in, climb ranks, gain trust, and when the time is right, break it all from within. Individuals or entire groups are carefully targeted. A movement, a political party, a corporation, a resistance, an idea. Agents are placed strategically. Not always spies in the traditional sense, but influencers, manipulators, sometimes even true believers, redirected slowly over time. It starts with small decisions, slight divisions, suspicion planted like a seed, plans delayed, loyalties questioned. Internal chaos grows, not because the outside pressure increased, but because the inside began to crack. By the time anyone notices, it's often too late. Leadership is compromised, purpose is confused, energy is drained by paranoia and conflict, and those who once stood united now look at each other as threats. Infiltration doesn't require brute force. It requires patience, charm, timing, and a deep understanding of what makes people trust and what makes them turn. Governments have used it. Corporations have weaponized it. Intelligence agencies have perfected it. In some cases, entire revolutions have been dismantled by a single person in the right room. And the most terrifying part? Once the damage is done, the infiltrator doesn't need to stay. They just leave, and the system continues to collapse under the weight of its own broken trust. So the next time something strong falls apart from the inside, ask yourself, was it weakness or precision? Sacred sparks. When culture becomes a weapon, every society is built on shared beliefs. Customs, symbols, stories passed from generation to generation. These cultural values give people identity. They tell them who they are, where they belong, what they should protect. And that's exactly why they can be used, to turn them against each other. Provoking a society through its culture isn't about brute force, it's about precision. You don't attack with bullets, you attack with gestures, words, images. A misunderstood comment, a desecrated symbol, a piece of art released at the right time, a holiday politicized, a joke that isn't just a joke, and the reaction, predictable, immediate, explosive. People take sides. One group feels insulted, another feels silenced. The media fans the flames. Politicians step in, not to calm, but to capitalize. Protests erupt, accusations fly, and beneath it all, the original spark may have been entirely manufactured. Because when you know what a society holds sacred, you also know what can break it. Cultural provocation has long been used as a tactic to divide. It's more powerful than ideology because it's personal. It's emotional. You're not just questioning someone's opinion, you're threatening who they are. And once identity is under attack, reason disappears. People react from instinct, from anger, from fear. And in the chaos, those who lit the match step back and watch. Sometimes the goal is to distract, other times to destabilize. Often it's to fracture unity, to ensure a population stays too divided to ever stand together again. And the most tragic part? Long after the smoke clears, the wounds remain. Not just political, psychological, cultural, generational. So next time rage erupts over a symbol, a phrase, or a gesture, pause and ask yourself, was this pain planted or simply harvested? Orchestrated glory. When heroes are built from illusion, rescue is sacred. In moments of fear, disaster, or despair, a figure emerges, brave, fast, selfless, a hand reaching into the fire, a voice in the rubble, a symbol of hope. And we believe, because we want to, because we need to. But what if the danger was staged? What if the rescue was rehearsed? In certain corners of the world, not all heroes are born in crisis. Some are scripted into it. Entire rescue operations, dramatic, emotional, televised, crafted not to save lives, but to shape public perception. A kidnapping resolved just in time. A hostage freed under the perfect spotlight. A disaster response that arrives a little too fast, with cameras already rolling. These operations don't just build trust, they manufacture it. They place a face in the minds of millions. A leader, a savior, a name that now carries weight, courage, loyalty. And from there, power begins to grow. Sometimes it's for politics, sometimes for military justification, sometimes simply for show. But the mechanics are the same. Create a problem, or find one small enough to control. Insert the right people, film the right angles, tell the right story. And by the time anyone asks questions, the medals have been handed out. The applause has faded and the image has settled into history. The danger? It works because emotions cloud suspicion, because when people are scared, they don't doubt the hand that saves them, and because manufactured heroes can be used again, and again, and again. So the next time the cameras catch, a miracle at just the right moment, before the smoke clears, before the tears dry. Pause, not to deny the hero, but to ask who needed them to be one. Engineered collapse. When ruin is the plan, some attacks aren't loud. They don't come with violence or public spectacle. They arrive quietly, wrapped in opportunity. A friendly loan, a promising investment, a business deal that feels like a breakthrough. But hidden beneath the surface lies intention, not to help, but to destroy. This is financial sabotage, the art of dismantling a person's life not with weapons, but with numbers. It begins slowly, a bad investment encouraged by someone trusted, a contract with clauses buried in fine print, a false promise of partnership that turns into dependency. The target walks forward, unaware they've stepped into a carefully laid trap. And then it unfolds. Bank accounts freeze, interest balloons, lawsuits appear, debt multiplies. The world begins to see a failing business, a reckless investor, a man who flew too close to the sun. But in reality, it was all orchestrated. A silent attack designed to collapse everything. Those responsible stay hidden. Shell companies, legal advisors, offshore accounts, complicit insiders. They create an illusion of natural failure while the target loses everything. Status, voice, stability. No headlines, no sympathy, just quiet, irreversible ruin. Financial sabotage works because it's clean. There are no bruises, no fingerprints, just broken credit scores, foreclosed homes, and reputations that never recover. And for the victim, the most painful part is knowing that no one sees the truth, that their collapse was never chaos, but strategy. So next time you hear of someone's sudden fall, don't ask what they did wrong. Ask, who needed them gone? Fabricated ripples. When small lies guide, big reactions. Not all crises are designed to destroy. Some are crafted to nudge. A minor document leaks. A forged email spreads quietly. A memo with just enough weight to feel real, but vague, enough to escape scrutiny. And suddenly, the air shifts. Conversations change. A department halts. A policy freezes. A reputation dims. This is the art of the minor manufactured crisis, not meant to collapse a system, but to gently push it in a new direction. It may target a specific person, a business deal, a piece of legislation. The goal isn't chaos, it's calculation. A small lie, dressed as truth, placed like a pebble in a stream, knowing it will send ripples through the current. And, because the crisis is small, no one stops to investigate. It's not worth the resources, not serious enough to trigger alarms. But it creates hesitation. It delays decisions. It forces explanations. And in that confusion, someone else moves forward. These tactics are used in politics, corporate wars, intelligence games. A fake audit report, a forged complaint, a misquoted directive. Just enough to trigger meetings, headlines, doubt. Just enough to change the outcome without appearing to interfere. It works because we trust documents. We trust procedure. We assume small problems come from small causes. But sometimes, the smallest crack is the one that redirects the entire structure. And by the time the truth comes out, if it ever does, the shift has already happened. The target is already off balance. The message already delivered. So tonight, as your thoughts soften and the world grows still, ask yourself, how many of the small problems you've seen were placed there on purpose? And when a tiny ripple changes your course, who dropped the stone?